We're very old. Okay, so I'm going to start with this question. So this is from Jefferson Navicki, and please excuse me
Hey,
if I'm
Jefferson.
mispronouncing your name. Jefferson says,
Hi.
Hey.
do you want to ask your question in like your own voice?
My dog is barking. It may be better if you just you ask it.
Gotcha.
But
Okay. Jefferson writes, I really loved this conversation, many parts of it. I'm actually only halfway through, but plan to finish the episode on my commute to home today. My question is about Arielle's poem, I Am an Animal, which she read at the start of the show. This is an incredible poem, I agree, and I loved hearing it aloud. I wonder if Arielle could speak a little more about this particular poem, why it's the book, and if its creation came before the other poems in the book.
Yeah. Um, I I mean, it was definitely one of the earlier ones that I wrote, but it was not the first. Um, and Years ago, I saw the movie Human Nature, which oh, my dog is photobombing, is video bombing. The movie Human Nature, which nobody's seen. It's really weird. It's hard to even come by now, but it's like from the uh, late 90s, early 2000s, I guess. It's got Patricia Arquette in it. Anyway, it's a movie about how it's a movie whose premise is that Patricia Arquette's character has sort of been raised by wolves, or like lives in the forest.
Actual wolves?
I mean, there's not wolves,
Or
but
like
it's like she's like
parents like we
feral.
had?
No, no.
No.
Like she's a feral being.
Okay.
She's covered in hair. She has like a
Oh,
thing
wow.
where she's covered in hair, and she is shunned, and so she goes to live in the forest, and she takes off all her clothes, and she basically like reverts to her primate self. Simultaneously, the actor Reese, I can't remember his last name, plays a guy who was also somehow left in an actual jungle and really raised by primates. She was not, but he is. And so he identifies as an ape. And the part of the movie is that he has to be sort of retrained to be human. And the thesis of this film, I saw the film with a bunch of, when I was at McDowell Colony in New Hampshire, and we were like playing hooky going off campus to go see this movie at a local movie theater. And it was one of those things where you're just like, you're at an artist's colony, and so everything feels like super intense and weird. And it's kind of like being, at summer camp or at like freshman orientation of college, where you're really bonded with these people who you don't really know that well. And so everything's really heightened. It's kind of like being stoned all the time, where you're like, this is the most important moment of my life. And so, like, the movie, too, I was just like, this. I mean, I was totally sober, but I was like, everything about this is like changing my world. But I rewatched it not so long ago to make sure it was like still the movie I thought it was, and it really is a movie that's who's at its center is like, we are primates, and we, what really differentiates us from other primate species? Not much, not much at all. And that's really stuck with me. And I would say that, I mean, in a lot of ways, it wasn't news to me. It confirmed things that I've always felt whenever I've gone to a space where I get to see other primate species. I feel incredibly drawn to them, and like could literally just sit and watch a mama gorilla for days on end. Um, because I feel it's the uncanny, right? I'm just like, oh, this is me. Like, that is exactly how I mother my children. And so, one of the rules I kind of gave myself about this project was that I would acknowledge my animal self. And I don't mean that in sort of an essentialist way. Like, I'm not, saying like I'm only driven by biology or anything like that, but really like just acknowledging, I guess, like the lack of hierarchy among animal species, and thinking of humans as animals rather than separate from animals. Animals are all over that book. And that's why, because I was like, oh, what does it mean that we're mammals? Like, we are ultimately mammals. And as really a kind of act of like remembering and humility and acknowledgement of our interconnectedness with other species, and also just like our appetites and our desires and hungers, are not that different really from other animal species. And that's where that came from. That's where that film comes from.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you like a quick follow-up question to that, because I hear in Jefferson's question a question that I get asked a lot and never know the answer to, which is about sort of manuscript making, like, you know, was that poem an earlier poem? Is that why it ended up first, or did it, come whenever it came? But somehow recognizing that this poem could be first sort of drove the organization of the book.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes those are such hard questions, right? What should be first and what should be last? But I happened to write this poem where the first word of every stanza is first I did this, first I did that. So then I was like, I mean, and I don't actually remember if it was my decision or if it was the editor's suggestion or if we went back and forth on that. I feel like there were other poems that I felt were sort of prefatory to that manuscript that I played with having first, and then that one, won out. But yeah, I wasn't writing it as a first poem in the book or anything like that. But it ended up being so.
Awesome. Okay.
Great. Hi, Ben.
Who's Ben?
Your dad.
Oh my God. This is so embarrassing. Who's Ben? So if you missed it, we were just talking about how I was raised by wolves. No, that's not true. Okay. The next question I'm going to read is, we love this question. This was asked by Maria Tononi.
Who maybe is here because there's someone with that last name.
I know. This is very exciting. So she asks, how does the practice of abundance fit with the feminist Killjoy Sarah Ahmed project? Can we be abundantly angry? I mean, boy, do I love that question. I keep confusing abundance with perfect happiness, and I want a way out of the happiness trap, but I also want to be happy. So I love this question in so many different ways. And I will say, I will confess, I had no idea who or what you were referring to, and we had a very exciting prefatory, to use your big word, moment of looking it up. But would you like to?
Yeah. This was a great question. So, I mean, a couple different things come to mind. First of all, I remember that when I had like a period where I was pretty interested in Tibetan Buddhism, and I was reading a lot of work around that and by the Dalai Lama, and people have many times, I mean, this is sort of the plight of the Tibetan Buddhists, of the Tibetan Buddhist community, is like, how do you stay quote unquote passive or, neutral, detached, like Buddhist detachment, and at the same time, argue and act on behalf of your nation and people who are completely under peril and oppressed. And, the Dalai Lama always says, like, detachment doesn't mean non-action. I mean, it's a subtle difference in some ways. I mean, in some ways, Tibetan Buddhism is about, quote unquote, non-action, but in another way, it's very much about action. I think, too, of like Jack Halberstam's The Queer Art of Failure, and like sometimes the most powerful thing is to opt out, which in some ways is the opposite of what I understand, and my understanding is minimal at this point. I'm definitely going to read a lot more about Killjoy, but from what I understand so far, it's like agitating and complaining and like taking up space and being, a troublemaker in those ways, calling out, what you see as problematic. And I think that, so there is obviously a difference between abundance and perfect happiness, or contentment, certainly. And, I think of abundance as an ongoing practice of gratitude rather than of happiness. And that's, I do believe that like practicing gratitude can lead to happiness and is maybe like one of the only things that leads to happiness. But I don't think that they are, they're synonymous. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's so much to talk about there. I was reading also that Sarah Ahmad herself said, sometimes being a feminist killjoy can feel like you're getting in the way of your own happiness. And if happiness means not noticing injustice, so be it. But that's not the only way of telling a feminist story. And she goes on to say, of course, sometimes it can be tiring being unhappy about so many things, but I find joy in the fullness of living a feminist life. And that really makes sense to me. I mean, I totally subscribe to the like well-examined life way of being, and that a well-examined life would, of course, mean understanding one's own complicity and privilege and intersecting problems in the world, and it's not about turning a blind eye to anything, and those are upsetting. Like, it's not because I choose to kind of live in an abundant framework that I'm not upset about anything. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm upset about a lot of things, most of the time. And at the same time, I feel really, really grateful about a lot of things in my life at all times.
So another follow-up question. I'm not trying to get into a semantic kind of linguistic argument with you, but I'm wondering about the word, specifically about anger.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering because my first response was going to be like, yes, in my experience, one can be abundantly angry.
Sure.
I'm quite good at it. But I don't think of you as an angry person. And you just use the word upset over and over again. And yes, you are very upset about many things and not quiet about them. And I think that's like really essential to who you are and how you live in the world. I wonder if there is a difference in your mind between being upset or being angry.
Yeah.
And
that's a really good question. I think there must be, not that I've ever really thought about it or tried to like tease that apart, but yeah, I mean, I'm often the person in the room who's like, this cannot stand, or who's just like, but wait, we're not looking at the bigger picture, and other people are like, oh my god, stop talking, and I'm like, no, I will not stop talking. So in that way, I think I'm absolutely like the feminist killjoy model.
Mm-hmm.
And those are, yeah, I'm upset with a situation, which I guess I feel is different than having like an angry worldview, which is about like resentment and feeling like things are like personally unjust, like you've been done a wrong. I mean, mostly what I'm upset about is not that I've been wronged, but that there's like something wrong happening. And rather than being angry about that, like I want to speak about it, but in the times when I do feel like I've been personally wronged, which certainly happens, like I try not to let I don't like being in that place. Like I try not to let myself stay in that for too long. I try to be like, okay, like get over it.
Yeah. This is an oversimplification that like I really would need to write a whole book about with you. But I do think the way you're describing it, that anger is much more connected to scarcity,
mm-hmm.
and being upset, the way you are sort of talking about it, is related to abundance, because the ability to say this cannot stand, to not be afraid that everybody will dislike you or fire you, or
mm-hmm.
what you're going to be punished for it, or who are you to speak up, is a kind of abundance. So that leads me back to the question in terms of thinking about, yes, I think one can be abundantly insert negative, or like not negative,
can be critical and also living in abundance.
Right.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true. And I think that part of the idea of abundance is like there is enough for everyone and we just need to redistribute it, but not that like there isn't enough for everybody at the outset, which I think is a really different worldview, right? Because like Trump supporters believe that there isn't enough for everyone, and
right.
So someone is taking their space. And those of us who are in opposition to that are not arguing for things to change because we think that there's like not enough space for everyone or all kinds of people, but that like in fact that there is,
mm-hmm.
and that's what is different. I think I told you this, that I was reading Pico Ier's book about living in Japan, and he said obviously like this is his outsider take on it, but he was like, in Japan they don't think of the opposite of pleasure as pain, they think of the opposite of pleasure as delusion.
Ooh.
And I was like, that is my worldview.
Wait, what does that mean?
Well, so that is totally what I believe too, right? Like that, like the worst, the place of the most miserable place to dwell in is a deluded place. Is like to live without acknowledging like what's really happening or who you really are with that. Like it's the unexamined life to my mind, right? It's like that is misery, is the opposite of pleasure. And pleasure is actually dwelling in like the present and in reality and like in acknowledging who we are and what's going on. And so I think of like pain maybe is kind of like the anger, and upset is the lack of delusion or something like that. Like if you can be both in pleasure and still upset because you're lacking in delusion, you're not deluding yourself about who you are or what's going on. But to be angry is to be like, it's painful, it's painful, it's painful.
I got right. And anger, at least for me, if I can take a step back from it, it's almost always related to fear.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, we talked a lot about this when we talked about birth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in that case, we were sort of trying to distinguish between pain and suffering, or
right.
the sensation of physical
right.
pain,
right.
as not being the opposite of pleasure,
right.
as not being a sign necessarily of danger,
right, or unwellness. Yeah, Mike was just saying recently, like, oh, my knee hurts, and I was going to complain about my knee, but then I remembered that you had 3 babies at home, and I was like, okay, but Rachel and I always said, and everybody in the home birth community always says, like, it's actually not the pain of breaking your knee or like having something wrong with your joints. It's the pleasure. You know, and I know this is not everyone's experience, but it was, you know, privileged to have it be my experience, that it is the pleasure of like really hard physical effort.
Yeah.
That is done for purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'm going to ask this question while my dad is still on the phone. 'Cause that's so exciting.
Oh boy.
Okay. So this one was from Delia Rainey. And they ask, when writing nonfiction or poetry about sex and quote unquote deviant sexualities.
Oh, Delia's here.
Oh, awesome. How do you deal with the fear of your writing being perceived badly by the public? I have a question for Delia if she wants to. We can either bumble along, but in liberal literary spaces where we are all trying to be hyper conscious of not offending others, how do you come to terms with the fear of possibly being wrong, if that makes sense? It totally makes sense. The one question that I have for Delia, and I'm interested in both of these possibilities, but when you wrote the fear of your writing being perceived badly by the public, you didn't, I think you did not mean that it was like badly written, but that it was offensive.
It was being bad, not bad quality.
Right. It was hurtful to people. Yeah.
Yeah. Or offensive as like it was not offensively bad in being like shitty writing, but being offensive and
definitely not the quality of writing, but like the topics.
But so what's interesting, I think we should answer the question first, but what's interesting is that often, you know, I'm really interested in art or writing in which...
garbage truck or something.
We live in the country. Okay. In which the critical response is not just like, I didn't like it, but this is the end of dance. Mm-hmm. This is the end of poetry. When really there's like a fear or an anxiety about the content, but it's conflated with the idea that like this content is so upsetting to us, like whether it's, you know, Bill T. Jones in dance, or, you know, Robert Lowell or Sylvia Plath, like this is the end of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, but so you both of us have upset people. Mm-hmm. Even this podcast has brought a lot of stuff up for people, which I really appreciate people being honest about. So how do you deal with the fear of your writing being perceived badly by the public?
So, yeah, and I mean, I think there's also the other question, which is like, how do you feel about being perceived badly by the people who you are intimate with in your life, like your family members
Yeah.
and stuff. And I was just at a class visit and they were asking me about that. And I will say, because Ben is here, I was just like, my dad doesn't read my poems.
Yeah.
So I don't have that issue.
Well, you
But-
haven't heard the podcast yet, but I say in the introduction, just to meta, I say in the introduction, you know, this episode. Oh my God, Langa, did we put an E on it for explicit? Shit. Oh my God, we might not have. Anyway, I say in the introduction, you might not want to listen to this with your children or with your parents. But when I told my dad, you might not want to listen to this one, he said, I think I'm better off listening to it than imagining. Which is a really interesting
When I
thing to
posted
say.
about the release of the book on Facebook, I was like, everybody, I hope you read this book except my dad. And my dad commented and was like, really? And I was like, yeah, I'm serious though. And he was like, okay. But I sort of joked about it because I was like, it's not like you read my poems in other times. You know?
Did he read it?
No. He doesn't
Okay.
read my
Okay.
work.
Or answer the question.
Yeah. So that, I would say that some of the artists I most admire are the ones who have been most who offend, who maybe don't seek to offend, but seek to provoke, certainly, and seek to shake things up. And even if it wasn't their intention, or, you know, some of them, like I love Kathy Acker, for example, and it was absolutely her intention to upset people. You know, I have a lot of admiration for...
Wait.
Yeah.
We're going to play a game that I just made up
Okay.
after you answer this question. It's called the Offensive Artist Game, where you say an artist that you love because they're offensive, and then I say one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So many.
But
okay.
okay.
So, I mean, I really feel that art only works if we have at all times people who are making work that is at the very, very far reaches of what is acceptable, or that goes beyond the reaches of what is acceptable or palatable, and that those artists are kind of like the bushwhackers, you know, trailblazers, making space for the rest of us to just kind of like puppy dog follow along behind them. And I do not claim to be one of those artists. I mean, if anything, I guess I wish that this book was like, I was braver and it was more, I mean, it wouldn't be that I'd be braver because I'm writing about my actual experience. My actual experience actually isn't that like crazy in the end, or, well, you know, well, I mean, there's a lot of things about my life that are very comfortable. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
you know, I think that there's a lot of things about that book that are still ultimately like within the realm of what is recognizable and comfortable. And one could, not me, but like one could and is a person who is more by their very being upsetting. I just watched this video of Taylor Mack performing Walt Whitman poems in drag. It's so incredible. You can get it online. It's free. It's like 15 minutes long. It's so beautiful. And like you know, their whole being is like disruptive. My whole being is not disruptive. That is like not the way I walk through the world. And I always look to artists whose whole being is disruptive, like their way of living. I'm reading a biography about the original Bohemians right now. I mean, they were really like, they were themselves uncomfortable, and they were making people extremely uncomfortable in ways that I do not.
That is my follow-up question. Do you think that artists who are more disruptive or provocative or offensive are at odds in some way with their own actions? Like, so one of the things that in my experience of you that makes you so wholesome is that you seem really at peace with your own choices. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't care if someone else is like, but those choices are upsetting to me, you know, or what you're talking about makes me uncomfortable or makes me upset. And I think, you know, for example, I'm trying to think of an example that's not me, but I can't because I'm very self-centered, and so like I don't really have anything deviant to say about my own life, but I think sometimes what's provocative about my work is that I'm so uncomfortable with my own normativity.
Right, but and that discomfort, like expressing discomfort around, let's say, marriage or mothering, like in your work, is making an enormous amount of space for other people who feel uncomfortable living similar lives, and I think that's really important. I think it is a different kind of discomfort to be like, wait, you did what? You had how many men living with you? And that is kind of like alien and foreign, and so that is a different kind of like, it's a different kind of space, I guess, that it opens up. But yeah. I
Wait,
do
you didn't
wish...
answer the question.
Oh, what was the question? Sorry.
How do you deal with the fear of it? So you're not, number one, you admire it in others. So maybe you're not that
I'm not that fearful.
Right.
Is the truth. I mean, I wish. Yeah. I mean, you just said like I'm wholesome because I'm at peace, and I would say, or we could say that I'm just like so fucking sure that I'm right.
Yeah, that's true
Which
too.
is
You're very, very,
often true.
Very, very self-righteous.
Yeah, I am very self-righteous. So that's, which is, and I mean, I think I am very self-righteous, and I'm also glad to be told that I'm wrong, and I will admit that I'm wrong, when I'm wrong. But when I'm right, I know that I'm right.
Can you think of an example?
So many examples. My favorite example about that is I was like, hunting is bad. And then, what did I know? I didn't know anybody who hunted growing up. I was like an Ashkenazi Jew, and I'm saying I've never met a hunter in my life. And then we moved to Maine, and I met this I was already friends with this woman. She was somebody I really admired. She's like a total naturalist, like really, just a wonderful person, and like a really great spiritual being, and a good person. And I was paired with her actually in like a conversation. We were supposed to like debate hunting. And I was like, well, of course, like hunting is wrong. And she was like, oh, I hunt. It's actually, she said literally like 2 sentences to me about it. And I was like, oh, you're right. I never thought about it. Like, I actually never met anybody who hunted. She's like, I'll take you hunting sometime. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I was just
Did you go?
I mean, I didn't have the opportunity, but yeah, I was glad to have my mind changed and just my perspective completely shifted.
Well, I'm so glad, but I still, I don't like it when the men have pictures of themselves with guns on the dating apps.
No, neither
I'm
do
not.
I.
I feel.
I'm
sticking to that
for sure.
That's not cool.
And I think, yeah, it's not. I agree, but I do think that there are people in Maine who are hunters, who are people who in other ways are completely aligned with our politics and worldviews, and I wasn't like really aware of that.
Right.
And that, I was wrong about that for sure.
Okay, that's a good example. Okay, before we continue, I would love to ask if there are any questions. There is one more, but any questions from people who are here, who would like to either unmute yourselves or communicate with Langa.
And then we have to play the offensive artist.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to play the offensive artist game.
That can be like our speed round at the end.
Yeah. We should all do it.
Yeah, we should all do it.
Okay, wait, you know what? Let's actually I invite you to join us in the first round ever of the offensive artist game. And the way you play, this is not a win-lose game.
It's only win.
It's only win. Put in the chat or say out loud an artist that you love or admire or are inspired by or turned on by, who, should I say, it's like it's not despite their offensiveness, right? It's not like, I won't even use an example because it's obviously Woody Allen. Like, not like that. Not like I like everything about this artist except the thing that is like really offensive. No, it's like you like them for this thing.
Right. And Woody Allen, I don't think is even trying to make like offensive, or Picasso would be an example, or Hemingway. Like none of those folks. Like we're talking about Kathy Acker level.
Okay, but somebody might have Picasso or,
But I would say that work is trying ultimately still to be, even as it's like avant-garde, it's also trying to like work within the system. I guess I'm talking about work that's like really sort of almost or genuinely outside the system of what's acceptable in that particular art form in that particular moment.
Okay. So the two examples you gave so far were Kathy Acker. Mm-hmm. Who was the other one?
I only said Kathy Acker so far.
Oh, okay. So I'll say, what's her name with the tall one who slaps her boyfriend?
The tall one who slaps her boyfriend
with the woman.
A performance artist?
Yeah,
Marina Abramovich.
Yes, thank you. Okay, Marina Abramovich. Okay, who wants to either chat or say?
Any medium.
You have to just wait.
Okay.
Just uncomfortable silence.
Oh, somebody wrote Holly Hughes. Oh, I love Holly
I don't
Hughes.
know. Oh, Dodie Bellamy.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't know Holly Hughes.
Performance artist, amazing performance artist.
Clip Notes. Oh my God,
Ooh,
Bret Easton Ellis.
See,
very interesting one.
I would say, yeah, I wonder about that because.
But at the time, I mean, I will say, I read Bright Lights, Big City.
Oh, I read all of them.
When it first came out, and I was like, oh.
But isn't it kind of uphold, like, ultimately those ideologies are the dominant ideologies. Like, I would say that the misogyny and capitalism, that even if maybe he's critiquing it, but it's not really clear, and the fact that it's not clear is possibly what's offensive about it, but ultimately, like, it is the dominant ideology. It's, like, totally...
Well, Michelle still wins.
Of course.
Okay,
Michelle,
all right, keep them coming.
Michelle knows I can talk to her about that.
Do you know Michelle?
I think if it's the Michelle that I know.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna add one to the list, but I don't know. I'm gonna add one on behalf of my father, which is that I don't know if he's listened, but I was thinking that he would be very interested in how you talk about James Joyce. In the podcast.
Love James Joyce.
And when you say that it seemed very important that that the main character be Jewish, and that there has to be an outsider. And so do you consider Joyce to be an offensive artist?
I think I do.
Yeah.
I think I put Joyce in that category because I mean I think a lot of what Ulysses is doing is not speaking. It is from the outside perspective, like it's outside of what it means to be a Dubliner, right? And also just like at the time, the amount of interest in like folk culture and low art was genuinely shocking to people, like how much he just put in advertisements and, like the stuff that we still sort of consider like detritus and trash.
Yeah.
Like he loved trash culture, Edwardian trash culture, but nonetheless trash culture. Ben wants to say something.
Oh yeah. Go.
Also, he didn't get married for like 20 or 30 years of his life with Nora.
Yeah.
He refused to take the sacrament. He lived with his head next to her feet and loved farting. I mean, this whole range of these letters on every level. He really separated himself from the typical Irish person of that time. Yeah.
He was a kinky guy, as was D.H. Lawrence, genuinely in their own lives. Really interesting. And I mean, also I would say that they're like cross-cultural, class crossing relationship was, really provocative at that time too, especially for somebody of his kind of power. There's some really interesting ones here.
Yeah.
Terrence Hayes.
I think he's fucking around right now, like in an interesting way. Like I think he's rocking the boat. now in a really interesting
Maybe I'm
way.
just not up on the latest.
Yeah, well, it's a conversation for a longer time, but I think I mean I'm just like responding to the question mark there. Like yeah, I think so. And the St. Vincent Millay, big time.
Oh yeah,
But that's
but still, like she was reading to society audiences. We're
Yes.
20 minutes from where she first read, and I've read there in Camden, and she was still a darling of like the set that she was a part of. And so yeah, I mean, I'm sort of thinking of people who like can't quite work within like literary or artistic society, even literary or artistic society of like bohemians or outcasts or otherwise. And so in that ways, I'm like sort of questioning about Terrence Hayes a little bit, but like I was thinking of Douglas Kearney and that work, which I think really.
Have you seen what he's doing now?
Yeah, I mean, it's really exploding past genre.
Yeah.
And that I think is I mean, his work has been exciting for so long, but like he just keeps kind of like saying, oh, do you think this is poetry? Do you think, and kind of the more attention he gets, the more he's like,
yeah,
let me also do this other thing over here.
Yeah, definitely check out what he's doing right now. Yeah, Phoebe Walter Bridges is a great example.
She is. And in fact, like that work is, I can't even really watch her stuff because it's from such a place of like almost theater of cruelty, like it's unpleasant for me to experience, which I admire and can't always like stomach. Yeah.
Right, who's the other performance artist with like all the menstrual blood?
Carolee Schneemann.
Like I feel like it's in that sort of genre. Toni Morrison,
Toni Morrison is so interesting. I mean,
Adrienne Kennedy.
I don't know Adrienne Kennedy's work. I love that Sarah Vapp is on this list. She will be thrilled to hear that.
Sarah Vapp helps me respond. Can you respond to this question without saying who asked it because it was sent as a direct message?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So the behavior, right. So performative versus
read
authentic.
The question.
Are you addressing when the person is offensive, and they're or performative over authentic, like their behavior that pushes into others is performative? And that's a really good question. I guess I'm really talking about the work more than the life lived. So I'm not talking about somebody who like, when I say doesn't fit into literary society, I'm not talking about somebody who like literally walks into a space and punches people, but more like the work punches people, I guess.
Chris Kraus.
Yeah, Chris Kraus for sure. Yes, that's a really good one.
I really enjoy your praise.
I mean, Toni Morrison is so interesting because in some ways I feel like really what she was doing was completely rewriting what the literary canon should look like and just asserting through total brilliance and genius, like this is actually what literature is, and this is what should be at the center of literature rather than what's at the margins of literature. Whereas there are other artists who I think are like, no, I'm gonna stay here on the margins and kind of like fight the fight from the margins. But Toni Morrison's work as an editor and everything else, I mean, I think she completely understood the market, and she kind of understood and was really like figuring out where can this kind of work, what space in the market can this work occupy.
I don't know if I totally agree with you. I do think that I guess I want to include writers and artists who didn't intentionally change the canon or change the market, but whose work did that, perhaps accidentally or because of one critic who saw something in them. And then it's really hard to kind of perceive the provocativeness of that artist because it's become
Right,
the
sure,
norm, right? And
right.
that's I
Well,
think
it's like
like Lenny
Renoir.
Bruce.
Right,
You know?
you can say Lenny Bruce and I'll say Renoir.
Okay.
Yeah, like, I mean, no. I mean, that's so great. Like, they're at the, like, we think of Renoir's work now as, like, the most beautiful, pretty, decorative, like,
Right.
let's get a magnet of it. But, like, at the time, Renoir, like, people were, like, screaming from those galleries of how offensive Impressionism was. Whereas Lenny Bruce, of course, was
Right.
always like, and you're not going to get a magnet of that.
But like if you watch, Abram has a T-shirt that Josh used to have that says, it has a picture of Lenny Bruce on the front, and then on the back it says he died for our sins.
Yeah,
which is a great T-shirt. But it's I remember when I first showed my kids Lenny Bruce, and they were like, this isn't that offensive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's also kind of an interesting, and I do think that on some level, maybe people who are just offensive in their own life, they don't fucking change anything.
Right.
I mean, they ruin other people's lives,
Right.
And
yeah, we're not talking about toxic behavior.
But people who are offensive in their work,
right,
do sometimes change
Yeah, I
expectations.
So. And somebody asked, does the tension need to be the same for everyone? Is that hegemonic? And I mean, I think the tension can't be the same for everyone, right? Because each of us comes to, like, what each of us are offended by is inevitably completely different.
No, I disagree.
You disagree?
Okay. I agree that each of us are have different tolerance, different proclivities, different things, that bother us. But like, I don't think, I'm going to use Anne Boyer as an example.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that some people, anybody who's alive should find Anne Boyer to be a genius.
Agreed.
And whatever words you want to use, avant-garde, radical, subversive, like whatever. But some people are like, this is making me very uncomfortable. And some people are like, I feel seen by this.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there's another way to answer that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not the same for everyone. And yet maybe it's not just subjective. Like, there is...
Yeah, that sort of duality needs to be at work. And some people need to feel seen, and maybe even a very, very small percentage of people, or a population of people who have never felt seen.
Yes.
While some other people are horribly offended and upset. I mean,
and maybe that's about Toni Morrison too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how upsetting that work was to people when it first came out. It was a little bit before my time.
They were banned, like,
Yeah, that's true. A lot of books.
I don't know.
Banned,
Beloved. I don't know when the last time you read Beloved was, but holy shit, that book is so amazing and so radical. And like, I'm so happy that the world recognized in her lifetime her genius and her contribution. But there's a small part of me that also feels sad that in some ways, her acceptance, it like kind of covers up some of the things
of
that are so
groundbreaking it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, one of an artist that I think of whenever I think of this question is Bob Flanagan, who David Trinidad knew personally, was friends with. And he called himself Bob Flanagan Super Masochist, and he would walk around. I mean, he was somebody who dealt with chronic, extremely painful illness and disability, and one of the ways that he chose to work with that, embody that, was to put himself through enormous amounts of additional external pain. So he would have like piercings and brandings, and he would walk, and so that in and of itself is upsetting to most of us because we don't like the idea of inflicting pain on our own bodies. But he would also walk around in public spaces with visible markers of his masochism, which is disruptive. I guess that's maybe and it's an overused word right now, but maybe disruptive is a better word than offensive. Yeah.
Someone is saying something nice. Oh yeah, Hannah Gatsby. Yes, yes,
See?
yes. I saw Hannah. Okay, can I just say?
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull rank on you
Yeah.
before you even say anything because I saw Hannah Gatsby live,
Mm-hmm.
and because oh my God, because one of my students said you have to go see Hannah Gatsby, and um, I saw her live in a very small space in Greenwich Village with Josh. Um, who I think was the target audience for it. And he did not like it, which I think was the point.
Yeah.
And it really was. It was. I did not see it coming. I did not see, and I just think, and then I watched it again on Netflix, and it really had a different.
Yeah, I'm sure
feeling.
Seeing it live would be different. I mean, I totally appreciate that work, but when I saw it, I was like, nothing here was actually surprising to me. It did not disrupt any ideas that I already had, which isn't a bad thing. It just means I'm already in alignment with this artist. So to me, I mean, again, to speak to that tension, there was nothing tense for me about watching that. But, you know, I know that I'm in a different space to that than some people.
Okay, so what is Joanna Klosterman saying? She's saying something nice, but I can't.
It's about an essay called Comedy Has Issues, about how we work out conventions of a culture from the laugh of a crowd or how a joke settles in the room. Yeah, I mean, I've been reading a lot about this lately, actually, connected to Trump's presidency and the idea that, like, anything offensive, which we mean in a totally different way, that he would then say, that was a joke. Like the way that jokes can also cover for genuinely offensive or wrong or dog whistles or, you know, harmful statements. So there's a lot of things there. Yeah, Cindy Sherman
was a very important early influence for me that fits very much into this. And Spalding Gray.
Right.
And Wayne Kostenbaum.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, like, I think, and I'm not actually saying I'm putting them in this category. I'm interested in them in a different category. Someone like Lena Dunham or Amy Schumer, who seeks to portray themselves as unlikable at the same time that they are critiquing a misogynist culture that wants to see them as unlikable. I think that's really interesting and maybe not totally, doesn't totally work, you know, in their work. But has some, you know, there's people like that whose work is kind of about, like, am I being unlikable though, but, like, I'm daring you to still like me. And then there's work like Kathy Acker's and Bob Flanagan's that I just feel like it's just like, you know what, I don't care if you like me or not. Like, it really doesn't care.
Yes, and I think that we are showing our age in that. I think that something, which is not bad, of course, but I think that there's some kind of, like, fourth wave thing going on with Lena Dunham and a certain with like cute something around like you know, you're gonna watch me like expose myself in a way that's, like, very provocative because women aren't supposed to do this, and, you know, but actually, like, the production value and the response of the other characters and, you know, is actually it's sort of creating the opposite. Right?
I agree, and which is why I would say that I think Broad City is actually more successful than Amy Schumer or Girls, because they're responding to one another, and their response to one another is often like, oh, what you just did is actually horrible. Like, it's horrible for me, it's horrible for you, it's horrible for the people around us, in, like, a genuine way. Right. You know, in, like, a really fallible way. That's not, like, a performance of fallibility. Right. But it's just, like, an actual failure.
But I wonder if we're just not getting it, though. Like, if there's something, because I'm just trying to think about the fact that those examples. I mean, I know Broad City is
that's even
that
younger.
Is that same time? Okay, wait, hold on. Let me read. Keep it coming. Yes, Wayne. Yes. Okay, hold on. My phone doesn't know me. Okay, this isn't exactly a question. Oh no, there are two questions here. So first of all, just a huge love for Monica. How would you pronounce this? Schlee?
Yeah, I
Schlee?
think they're here.
So because
Monica's here.
Monica wrote to us and said that she has actually read, which puts her in like a world of 5 people, women poets on mentorship. She took a whole year to read it and savored every word. So she wants to, I mean, this is, makes us very, very happy. And she says she's constantly looking for mentors and looking for validation to be an artist mom. Yes, I am still looking for that. Are you my mother? She says, I think the world doesn't support artist mothers enough. So true. How do you balance mothering and artistry? And what does a day in the life look like for you? And she said she thinks of both of us as mentors.
We are very honored and just amazed that you read the book. But yeah, that's why we made it.
Yeah.
I guess.
Can I ask a question in addition to that? Thank you so much for reading my question. I'm totally thrilled. Thank you. And I'm really enjoying everything you're putting forth. My question after that I just asked you, a day in the life, and how does one balance, motherhood and artistry, is if I'm constantly looking for validation from the outer world, at one point, do you just say, who gives a shit? Right? And does it matter? And what would validation look like anyway?
Yes.
Well, I mean, first of all, yes.
Yeah.
Yes to everything. I also would like to.
And I think it relates to the question we're talking about. I mean, I would say like validation to my mind is so much less interesting to me than like, do I feel like I've disrupted something about myself and my own art making and my own like understanding of myself by what I made? And if I have, then then I'm onto something.
I'm still working on this in therapy very actively, so I haven't reached this level of enlightenment. I'm like still stuck in the hole of validation. Every time I think I get out of the hole, I realize I'm still in the hole. And I at least I know it's a hole.
It's true.
And I know that trap of wanting validation it's never. I'll just speak for myself. It is never going to work out for me, because if I have come to realize that it's an addiction, and there's never going to be a person who will fill up that empty space. It has to come from me. And I think that it's so difficult for certain kinds of people to get out of that hole, because even like the nature of your question, like how do you balance these things?
Yeah.
So who defines balance?
Or why is balance the goal?
Why? Yeah.
Or it's like the paradigm.
Right. Like, and even the concept of balance, right?
Yeah.
Like I often wish that I was more balanced.
Right?
Yeah, but do I wish I was average? Like that's a kind of balance. Like there's no good things and there's no bad things.
Moderate.
We're just balanced.
Right.
No, I think it's like what I'm trying to reframe the question of validation and the lack of support for mother artists, both from the external world, which is great, and from my internal world, which is great, like the lack of support for myself that I give myself. I'm trying to like reframe that question to myself and my students as, what are the forces out there in the world that aim to kill you, or to destroy you, or to belittle you, or to be obstacles to you on whatever your terms are? And what are the forces inside of you that are doing that as well? And I think, often all of literary criticism is a force, or all of Freudian psychology, or all of the parenting books of a certain kind of ilk. And so I think it's, I don't know, I'm trying to think about that, like to, instead of to say, oh, you know, I have finally become, you know, a yoga nidra expert, you know, or whatever, you know, or like, I remember you sent me the book on connection parenting like years ago. I was so angry with you because I think I was still in this trap of like, okay, I just have to, I have to like do this thing right, and then I will feel like a good mother. But that it's never going to be that way. No. So it's really more like, is this going to help me or is this going to hurt me?
I really think, yeah, totally. And I think it's also about choosing who you look at in the world differently. Like, rather than accepting the dominant narratives of what it looks like to be an artist or a writer or even like a mother artist or writer, and then holding yourself to that standard, like, don't accept that as your model. You know, keep looking for another model until you find one that works for you. And that model is out there, because the truth is, like, throughout history there have been people doing all of these things, whether that be non-monogamy or that be, you know, intersectional feminism, or if that's, you know, being an offensive avant-garde artist or being a mother artist or any of these things. Like, we tell ourselves that, like, no one's done this before, well, or we hear no one's done this before and it's not possible or whatever, but the truth is, like, people have been doing this all along, and you just have to kind of like dig a little harder to find the ones who are, and then just like turn your gaze to them and be watching what they do, or, you know, reading their biographies or looking at those stories, because they're out there. They're just like written out of, you know, they're in the margins, or they're written out of history. And you know, I'm working on this book about kink right now, and it, you know, Ben was talking about Joyce. Like, Joyce and D.H. Lawrence were very open, actually, about their kinky sexuality. It's everywhere in their work and in their letters and things that they published. And they would, you know, do it like in front of friends. They would sort of like be open about their sexuality. And still, like, I remember reading this article, I think it was in the New Yorker, a piece about Lawrence, and so I had somebody going to Lawrence's house and seeing him and his wife do this whole thing where they were like, he was like beating her, or she was beating him, and they were screaming at each other, and the visitor was just like, oh my God, like, what's this horrible thing happening? And then they kind of like picked themselves up and like, like, they were so happy and cheerful. And I remember even at the time reading this piece, and the writer of the article who was just reporting on this was themselves like unquestioning, like, this was a horrible marriage that Lawrence had with his wife. It was clearly terrible and toxic, and nobody in the sphere, in the what I was reading, was recognizing, like, oh no, they were in a consensual DS relationship. But that's how I read it. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I think that history has erased something that they were actually very open about. And even within their avant-garde circle, this was in like Taos, you know, where they were living among bohemian artists. People were like, what is going on here? It's not okay.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to push back a tiny bit, which is to say, I do think it's significant that those are examples of men who were able to, you know, who were not punished in the same way. And I was thinking about how, as far as I know, Warren Buffett is non-monogamous, and publicly so. Dad, who's the guy? Not J.P. Morgan, the other guy, the other super, super, super rich guy at that time. And they were in competition, and they were trying to each get the others.
Henry Walters.
Yeah, Henry Walters, also very openly non-monogamous. But again, those are examples of men.
He actually he was never married, but he lived with this married couple, and then when the guy died, he then married the woman.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I've heard that story.
So, and then when, you know, Monica asked that question, and you were talking about, like, look to the examples, this has been going on, you know, it's true. And yet, when I was thinking about examples of historical women artists, mother artists, you know, I immediately thought of Dorothea Lange, who put her kids in foster care. She had no options other than to do that. Susan Sontag, who left her kid for, you know, most of his childhood.
Joni Mitchell.
Joni Mitchell, Jane Goodall.
Yeah, sure.
You
No,
know,
I mean,
I'm just saying, like, there is.
Oh, yeah.
They were not able.
No, yeah.
To even forget about being a good mother.
Right. No. I'm not suggesting that we ignore like real world power differentials. And somebody asked about Bill Maher. Like, I'm not talking about people who are just like, fuck everybody, I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm talking about like, yeah, you have to dig really deep, but I find it extremely inspiring. And
yes.
And it's just sort of happenstance that I brought up Lawrence. Like, I could have brought up Anais Nin or somebody else who was just like, you know what? Even in this time and place, I'm going to operate completely outside of this system. You know, or many, many queer artists, certainly, and many, you know, trans people who, you know, who were like serving in the Civil War, you know, as men who were not biologically, you know, assigned male at birth, and, you know, throughout history, who just were sort of refused. Josephine Baker comes to mind as somebody who was just like, I'm just actually going to leave the country and go someplace where they understand a little bit about who I am and what I do. You know, yes, because the real life circumstances for a lot of these people made it impossible to have, you know, limitless choices, for sure. But I do just find like in every culture, in every moment in history, I think there is at least one story of someone who was just like, not going to do it, not going to do any of the things you say that I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really crucial that we kind of like remember that those stories are out there for us to find and look to, and that we can like, and even if they don't make total sense for us, we can sort of like